Today is August the 11th. Where should I start sharing the gospel? Let's find out together as we study Acts chapter 13. Reading through the Bible in a year, I'd like you to read Acts chapter 13 today. Here we have recorded what's called the first missionary journey of the Apostle Paul. In the first three verses, we see what took place to separate Barnabas and Saul. Among the prophets and teachers of the church at Antioch of Syria were Barnabas, Simeon, called the Black Man, Lucius from Cyrene, Manaen, a childhood companion of King Herod Antipas, and Saul. One day as these men were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Dedicate Barnabas and Saul to this special work for which I've called them." So after more fasting and prayer, the men laid their hands on them and they sent them away. Now, they all knew that the Lord had told Saul that he would eventually become a special messenger to the Gentiles. So Barnabas and Saul, in verse 4, leave, being directed by the Holy Spirit, and they look for a place to share the gospel. The first place they go is Barnabas's stomping ground. They go to the island of Cyprus. There on Cyprus, they have a successful ministry. They leave Cyprus after a successful ministry, and they go to Saul's stomping ground, Asia Minor, from Tarsus over about 50 miles westward. There in Acts 13:13, after they leave Cyprus, Acts 13:13, Paul and his companions then left Paphos by ship for Pamphylia. Landing at the port town of Perga, there John Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem. Now, John Mark was a relative of Barnabas. He was also familiar with Cyprus, but he wasn't familiar with Asia Minor. So when the going got tough for John Mark, he left. Barnabas and Saul and the others who were with them continued ministry in Asia Minor. The rest of chapter 13 is a long sermon by Paul. It's interesting that in verse 44, after Paul's sermon, the following week, almost the entire city turned out to hear Paul specifically preach the word of the Lord. But when some of the Jews saw the crowds, they were jealous. So they slandered Paul. They argued against whatever he said. Then Paul and Barnabas said, "You know what? You Jews have had the gospel long enough. We're going to start to focus on the Gentiles." And indeed, that's what they do. Now, they never stop ministering to Jews, but they do start ministering directly to Gentiles. And the Lord brings growth. In verse 49, the Lord's message spread throughout that region. We started today with the question, where should I start sharing the gospel? Just like Barnabas and Paul, you start where you are. You start with what you know. But just like Barnabas and Saul, as the Lord opens new doors, be willing to walk through those doors and go wherever God has called you. Like, follow, and subscribe to this devotional on whatever platform you use to listen to it. Tomorrow, we'll answer the question, what do I do after I share the gospel?